Hey y'all, welcome to the Team LoCoFit Roundtable, hosted by me, Laurin, owner of Team LoCoFit. Each week, I am joined by one of our coaches to dive headfirst into the nutrition, training, mindset, and coaching strategies we use with our clients. If you loved the show, please subscribe, leave us a review, tell a friend, you know the drill. And for more information about coaching, the programs we offer, and additional content, visit teamlocofit.com.
All right, and we are back for part 2 with Dr. Lyon. Thank you again for coming on. If you guys didn't listen to the first one, I would highly encourage you to go do that. It was all about the importance of protein and why Dr. Lyon has this muscle-centric approach to her practice with all of her schooling and everything. And it's so important to understand not only, is muscle important for, protein important for muscle building, but it really is important for just aging and just living a healthy life. And honestly, most people don't have enough protein and enough muscle in their in their body, and it creates all these downstream issues. And why do we have all these issues, right?
Right.
The narrative surrounding protein has always been, you need 50 grams of protein to hit your RDA, to hit the RDA, right? And people see that and they go, oh, okay, most people have about 50 grams of protein. Like, let's be honest, right? They get about 50 grams, maybe not in the way that we would suggest it, but they get it. And sure, that's enough to make sure that you don't have a disease state, but that doesn't mean that you're even remotely optimal. And there's been this huge, just kind of anti-crusade against red meat, which is so fascinating to me. So I'm really excited for us to dive into this. So first, why has red meat, and just protein in general, gotten this bad name in the medical community?
It's interesting. So red meat and protein in particular is really up against a lot, and it's the mouse with the microphone. So you have a very small group of vegan, vegetarian individuals that sit on boards or create committees and have an ethical problem with eating animals. And listen, I actually was vegetarian for a long time. So there is this component of this ethical desire to not eat animals. I can appreciate that. But what's happened is that has then skewed the media and also skewed health information. Mm-hmm. So now we are not just hearing that, you just shouldn't eat animals because you feel badly. We're hearing protein causes cancer, protein is bad for the environment. What are some other ones? Protein is bad for bone, you name it. Red meat is going to kill you. It's the reason for cancer, heart disease, hypertension,
cholesterol.
This one food group that we've been eating for 2 million years by some unknown mechanism is going to be the end of us all.
Yeah. Okay. Seems legit.
By some unknown mechanism. Let me just say that. So what we're up against is this false narrative of, PETA and individuals that have a moral component against eating animal products. And for whatever reason, they've decided that cows are the devil, that if you eat that is going to be the end of you.
Yeah. And it's so frustrating because it's not based in anything factual. So people always point to, there's a few, the few studies, right?
But what are the studies? Let's even talk about this. So just so you guys are aware, this is something that I personally come up against on a daily basis. And there's the Super Bowl of journals, which is Annals of Internal Medicine, which is for those in the medical community and those who are treating patients. And even, for you guys, it is one of the gold standards, right? It's just like Cell is a gold standard, which has its own issues, but whatever. Annals of Internal Medicine did this massive review, and they used something called the grade system, where they analyzed a huge amount of data and many, many high quality studies, and they looked at, are any of these claims true? Should we be cutting down on the 1.8 ounces of red meat that we are eating daily? Which, by the way, is what, according to the data, roughly what we're eating, 1.6 to 1.8 ounces of red meat a day. Okay. Should we cut down? So the grade system is incredibly rigorous. And what they found, are you ready? Was that there was no reason to cut back on the amount of red meat, and that red meat actually wasn't associated with all of these claims. It put people into a tailspin. They tried to discredit the researchers. They tried to get them fired. They tried to get them banned. It was this, I've never seen anything like it, this personal attack on some data. Okay, so this is kind of what we're up against. So all of the claims that red meat, quote, causes cancer, and David Klurfeld, who is amazing, was on the committee, and he wrote a whole analysis about this, is that when you look at the IR committee, which is that committee that talks about, whatever, the institution, I don't remember the acronym, the name, but it's some cancer recommendations. And everybody quotes it. Everyone in the vegan vegetarian world kind of quotes these studies or whatever it is, this grading system. And all of the high quality randomized control trials, a large portion of them were thrown out because they have a small sample size. So they took low quality epidemiology data and said they took low quality evidence and then made global health claims based on low quality evidence.
The one I remember, I've seen obviously a few, but it's, they're looking at, okay, it's not an intervention, right? Like you said, it's these huge, broad
data.
Do you smoke cigarettes? Are you overweight? If you eat processed meats, this is the same risk as smoking cigarettes. You're like, what are you talking about? Have we controlled for any lifestyle factors? Have we controlled for body composition? Have we controlled for their drug and alcohol usage and all this? No. So you're just going to say that it's this one thing? Like, remember that one movie that was so popular, What the Health? They were like, eating an egg is the same as smoking a cigarette. They literally said that in a
That's insane. You realize how insane that is, right?
Can everybody appreciate how crazy this is? And what, I watched that and I was horrified.
Yeah.
And so here's what's so interesting too about this kind of stuff, right? So I would say that I have a decent amount of nutrition training and knowledge, right? Like more than the average person. I certainly don't know everything, but I know more, right? So I will watch all of these things with a grain of salt in general, right? No matter what it is. And I can easily point out, okay, this is a documentary, this is entertainment, and this likely has flaws, right? And I try to do that with every documentary that I watch, because everything that is made by somebody is going to have inherent bias. That is the way that it works. It is made for entertainment, and they're going to show fun, sexy things that people want to see, right? But what I don't understand is I would never watch something in a different, just field, right? And be like, this is it. This is the gold standard. I saw it on a documentary. It must be real. But that is what people have done with nutrition documentaries.
Outrageous. And then they say to you, but you read this study, you did this research, but have you seen What the Health, or have you seen Game Changers? It is so above and beyond. And I think that this comes from a component of wanting to belong to a tribe, or a component of maybe not having disseminated like passion or attention, or just, do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Some kind of way to rouse an individual is just misplaced, and it's misplaced information. And it's interesting. People don't, the more you know, the more you realize, man, I have so much more to learn.
For sure.
The less you know, the more you think you know everything.
Mm-hmm. And the thing with the red meat, and I probably hear this one, I would say I hear the cancer one the most, and then red meat raises your cholesterol, right? And it's like, all right, well, first of all, there's a huge genetic component with cholesterol. We need to understand.
The majority of cholesterol is made within the human body. Dietary cholesterol in particular has very little impact on blood cholesterol.
Perfect.
The ingestion of dietary cholesterol. Yeah.
We need to put that on a billboard and sponsor it, because between red meat and eggs, people always say, oh, well, there's a lot of cholesterol in here. Isn't this going to raise my cholesterol? And it's hard to say, not necessarily, because people are like, well, that doesn't make any sense. And while it can have an impact. It's a compounded impact of everything else, right? Sure. If you're only eating highly processed, low grade red meat, you're over consuming calories. It's not exercising.
A calorie issue. It is absolutely a calorie.
You're smoking cigarettes. You're just watching, maybe that's not the best thing. But if you're having, I eat a lot of red meat, right? Like I personally, it's my favorite. There's a lot of, vitamins and minerals and nutrients.
Yeah.
I think it tastes the best. There's a ton of different options. And So I choose to eat red meat for that reason. I eat whole eggs pretty much every single day as well, right? My cholesterol is fine. Am I saying that, obviously again, cholesterol is going to be genetic. There's people who are going to have to watch what they're eating a little bit more, but there's all these other components too. Are you exercising? What is your stress response like? Like, are you physically active? What is the rest of your diet? And that's going to be much more important instead of saying, hey, don't eat red meat and here's a statin.
No.
What? No. First of all, don't do that.
And also when you control for calories, it's excess carbohydrates that are going to have a much bigger impact on cholesterol levels, right? Just because of the repackaging in the liver and aspects of the way in which excess carbohydrates are metabolized, and excess calories are metabolized. And
everybody responds differently to food as well, right? So some people respond better to carbohydrates, some people respond better to fats. And that's something that I'm sure you've seen in your practice. I see that all the time with my clients. And, part of that is just how people process food. Part of that is their, where they come from. There's all these different factors, right? Genetic history. So you have to take that on an individual basis. But if you are relatively calorie controlled, obviously you can go through periods of surpluses. I understand that. Periods of deficits. But if you're relatively in a calorie balance, and you're eating red meat and whole eggs and you're active, you're going to be okay. You know what I mean? And
these are very nutritious foods.
Yeah. So why are you so pro red meat? Because I know obviously you are, I am as well, but just give some of the reasons why it would be an ideal choice to have red meat.
Well, I mean, everybody thinks about red meat as it relates to high quality protein. Yes. And creatine and iron and zinc and B vitamins, and selenium. There's so many other reasons. It's so nutrient dense.
Yeah, you're not going to get that in other protein sources. And not saying you can't eat other protein sources either. I eat other protein sources as well. I eat poultry, I eat fish. So I'm not going to not eat those things either. But if I have a choice, I'm most likely going to get some kind of lean red meat is going to be always my choice.
Yes. Let's talk about, I do want to talk about the whole cancer. The whole cancer aspect. So one of the things that you have to think about as a provider is what is the mechanism of action? Why would it be that protein or that red meat is the one thing that causes cancer, heart disease, hypertension, like all of these things? We don't have anything else that we eat that causes this, right? Doesn't that seem a little suspicious? Okay. So let's say, what would be the mechanism of action? So people would say, it increases mTOR stimulation. And for those that listen to the part 1 of this podcast, mTOR is mechanistic target of rapamycin, which, by the way, is a nutrient sensor complex. So it is this complex that is in almost all tissues, including the liver, the pancreas, skeletal muscle, brain, it's all over. And it's interesting because people will say, excess stimulation of mTOR is a problem, and that's what causes cancer, because it is, first of all, not an initiator of cancer, it is a growth promoter. Second thing, if you guys are tracking, what kind of cancer are we talking about? Lung cancer, which is largely related to smoking, right? Or we're talking about ovarian cancer. What kind of cancer? So cancer in and of itself is so general. So these are just issues with the narrative. mTOR stimulation in skeletal muscle is exquisitely sensitive to branched chain amino acids, in particular leucine. mTOR stimulation in pancreas, in liver, is exquisitely sensitive to excess calories, to energy, carbohydrates. So how does that make sense? So if you really are concerned about the overstimulation of mTOR, you really should reduce the carbohydrates, excess carbohydrates in your diet. A vegan vegetarian diet is almost solely carbohydrates. Okay, so this kind of thinking is weird. And, and let's just look at some of the science. So for all those people that quote, that it's that red meat is classified as a carcinogen, all this stuff, which is based on epidemiological data, which again is typically data that's used to think about a hypothesis, and then you use a randomized controlled trial to prove a hypothesis. So the relative risk of smoking and cancer is 12. You're like, okay, what does that number mean? Well, anything above 2 would be considered significant, right? So if you smoke, the relative risk of smoking cancer is about 12. So again, this is above 2. The relative risk of eating protein or eating red meat in cancer is 1.2 to 1.3. So when you just look at the data actually doesn't support any of that. So the question then becomes, when does data become relevant? And data can't just become relevant when you want it to be relevant, right? So again, protein, red meat does not cause cancer. There's never been any evidence to support that. The people that are looking at these studies, you have to look at the quality of the evidence that you're quoting.
And the one thing too that I think that gets misconstrued a lot with plant-based is I would say, there are positive benefits with having more plant-based things in your diet, meaning fruits, vegetables, whole grains, right? Like nobody is arguing that having that, right? But that is, the problem is plant-based does not mean lack of meat.
Right.
But people hear that and go, oh, plant-based means vegan. It's like, no. There were benefits to having a more plant-based diet.
I totally agree with you. Yes.
And you're like, oh, okay, so that means I should be vegan. No, that means you should have fruits, vegetables, and whole grains and actual real food. And now if you add animal proteins on top of that, you're doing really, really good, right? Like that is the gold standard, to have a healthy, well-balanced diet with whole grains and fiber and micronutrients. Cool. But people hear that and then they think, oh, okay, you should just be vegan. And again, like we said, there are ethical reasons that people choose to be vegan. I personally am not one of those people, but I respect and have clients who are either vegetarian or vegan, and friends. Like, if that's what you want to do, that is 100% fine. You need to understand that there are going to be nutritional considerations that you need to take care of so that you don't become deficient in certain micronutrients, and particularly with protein and all of that. But if you are, choosing to follow this diet because you think that it's better for the environment, not from an animal slaughtering perspective, but from a just environmental perspective, or you think that this is better for your health, it's not necessarily the case.
Right. None of that's true. Actually, when you think about issues with environment, you have to think about transportation, electricity, and industry, which make up the majority of impact on the environment.
And
cattle agriculture makes up a very small amount.
Other food that you're eating still is contributing there.
Right. And the other food, and typically if you live in Minnesota, you probably shouldn't be having avocados. So you can't pick and choose. Again, you can't pick and choose what kind of information you're getting and where you're getting it. And you can't say, oh, well, eating meat is bad for the environment, but what about the transportation of avocados and the food waste? If you really want to do something good for the environment, you probably wouldn't be traveling, you'd be using less electricity. There's all these other things where agriculture is especially in the US, agriculture is makes up a very small percentage of contribution to issues with the environment.
Yeah. And if you choose that you want to buy products from, certain type of farming, that's a whole different thing too. Like if you don't support that, that's also fine. Right. But if you are doing this, if you're not eating animal products because you think that it is going to give you cancer, it's going to raise your cholesterol, it's going to make you an unhealthier person, we really have to shift that narrative, because that is just not the case. And we need to look at so many other factors first, because to your point, people are already, first of all, not eating enough protein. And now you're hearing, oh, be vegetarian, be vegan. Now they're eating even less.
Absolutely.
And now some people, I have clients, I have friends, people who try very, very hard and do exceptional on a vegan diet because they are putting a lot of effort into making sure that their calories are controlled and they're eating a high protein vegan diet. That is not a lot of people. Like that is a lot of work. And I applaud them and I'm so proud of them for doing that. And I'm like, yeah, if you want to do that, like, cool, this is what we have to do. So if you want to fit within these constraints, here's what I need you to do. And they execute on it, and it's great. But if they didn't,
and the question that you have to ask is, what are the unintended consequences of this bad advice?
Yes.
What are the unintended consequences? You know what's going to happen? People like your grandmother are going to hear that eating red meat is bad for you.
Yeah.
So you are now going to remove high nutrient dense food matrix, and she's going to replace it with some more tea and toast.
Of course.
But you see, so these unintended consequences of the narrative, and those people that are that financially perhaps it's expensive for them to eat meat, they're going to then eat less.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're going to replace it with what? Listen, I'm telling you, I've been in clinical practice for almost 15 years. There is a broccoli quota that an individual has. You tell them that they should reduce red meat, they're not eating more broccoli. They're eating more chips and bread, and they're just not eating more green vegetables.
Yeah, no. Yeah, you're not replacing it with, tofu and roasted Brussels sprouts. Like, if you are, great.
Right. No.
But you most likely aren't. You know what I mean? You're having these really high calorie dense foods, or you're having this says vegan on the package.
Totally.
Great. Oh, awesome. You know what I mean? Like, that's not useful. And so it's really, really hard. And it's such a tough thing because we want to make these changes, you know what I mean? And it's like, it feels like you're just fighting against so much bad information. And like I said, a lot of times I don't fault them necessarily, but most traditional MDs do not have a lot of nutrition advice, right? But then, so I don't expect them to know everything, right? But people go into a doctor and then the doctor gives them some nutritional advice. And then you're like, whoa. If somebody's cholesterol is a little off, oh, just stop eating red meat. Did you even ask me if I was eating red meat? Did you ask what else I was eating in my diet? Did you ask me how active I was? Did you ask me how many hours a day I'm sleeping? Did you ask me any of those other things? You just made a blanket statement without knowing anything about my lifestyle or my diet. And you said, oh, just take out red meat and replace it with what? Should I be having fresh seafood? Or, like you said, chips? Because the other thing about protein too is that it's very satiating. So
in fact, that is one of its major benefits because of the hormone release that it has. And Heather Leidy has done a lot of great work on this. And
if you're not eating that, if your protein is low, and I'm not just talking about for like a day, I'm talking about consistently, if you're just really, really reducing your protein intake, people are going to be hungry and they're going to fill that with other options. And they're not going to be like, oh, let me have a perfect serving of, black beans and this like kale salad. Like, no.
And also, what about the extra calories that we're talking about? Now we're talking about, we know that there are essential amino acids that we need, and it's not just the branched chain amino acids. You need methionine and lysine. So what is then going to happen to meet these requirements? The caloric load becomes exponentially higher.
Yeah.
And I did a recent IG post, and it has a breakdown of how many calories that you would have to eat of a certain product to kind of equate to something as simple as red meat.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're talking about 3,000 calories.
It's a lot different.
This is a lot. So it's not just, we don't really eat for protein. We do, but essentially we eat for amino acids.
Yeah. And I was trying to explain this to somebody the other day, like, it's just a lot harder. It's not impossible, but it is just harder to do with, particularly a vegan diet. And you have to just really, really try and not only pair certain foods together, you're likely going to have to supplement. And then you're also going to really have to make sure that, 25 grams of animal protein is not 25 grams of vegan protein, right? Like there is a difference here. So it's just something to consider. And like we've talked about in this podcast and the last one, excess consumption of calories for most people is not going to be beneficial, right? If you're in a surplus because you're trying to gain more muscle mass and then you're going to cut down and do a show, or you're a competitive athlete, we're not talking about this. We're talking about the average person who has been eating in excess of calories for 5, 10, 20 years, and now they're going to have these problems.
Right.
So I think that can also get kind of murky in the bodybuilding or the fitness community, because we're so used to, hey, you go through periods of a surplus in calories, then you go through a period of a deficit, and you kind of go through these cycles. And that's totally normal and acceptable for somebody who has physique goals or just competitive athletic goals.
It's actually great. The idea of caloric cycling and the idea of macronutrient cycling is actually an exceptional idea. I really do think, having been in practice for so long, there are, it's really great to push your body to a lower body fat percentage for a period of time. I really think that it is totally beneficial.
Yeah. But people will hear what we're saying. They're like, oh, well, what? It's like, no, we're not talking about that. We're not talking about the highly structured, very active individual who has very particular goals. We're talking about somebody who's just kind of going through their life, and for breakfast they get a Starbucks drink with sugar and whipped cream, no protein. For lunch they maybe have half a sandwich and something else, and then dinner they maybe have a regular meal that we would suggest for dinner, but then they have some shit afterwards, and then you're like, what did you eat all day? And it's so funny because again, like with the people that I'm working with or our team's working with, and probably even you to some extent, like you're getting people who are already interested in this stuff, and there's definitely places to improve. We do have a lot of beginners as well, which is great. But generally speaking, people who are reaching out are going to have some kind of some knowledge base.
Yeah.
But I'll talk to people who don't know any of this stuff, right? And then you're like, hey, just like send me what you've been eating, right? Because they'll ask me questions like, well, I really can't give you any answer until I see what you've been doing.
Right.
And then I'm mortified still that today in 2020, people will eat this certain way. And I'm like, I don't expect you to eat, 6 perfectly portioned meals a day. That's not what I'm asking you to do. But like, holy shit, this is just so...
It's outrageous, right?
Unacceptable. Like, going back to my grandma is a perfect example. For breakfast, if we had no like, hey, here's what you should try to be doing.
Right.
She would have a bowl of cereal with like a fruit. She'd have half a peanut butter sandwich and like chips for lunch. And then like...
That sounds like a pregnancy diet.
Yeah. And then like maybe some kind of protein at dinner. And then like cookies. You know what I mean? Like, you're like, what? But people, like, not just like, like an 80-year-old lady, like people who are 40 are eating like this because they just don't know that, oh, I'll just skip the meal, or I'll do this, or I'll eat later. Or you're like, oh my gosh, no, we got to work on this. Like, this is not okay. And it's, like you said, aging is not just when you're older. Aging is always happening, and we really need to focus on this. And I'm really hoping that in the coming years, I mean, you've done such a phenomenal job of talking about, protein in general and just red meat and the benefits, that, hopefully this information can continue to shift. And, this needs to be the work that needs to be done. Like there's a lot of issues, and I understand there's so many things going on in the world that we have to talk about, but it's like, if people aren't healthy on like a foundational level,
Totally.
Everything else goes to shit. Like, you want to know, people are so miserable and depressed and unhappy and just like causing so many problems that like, are you a healthy, functioning, like active person? No, you're not. You know what I mean? Like, we actually need to fix these things too. And again, not saying you need to be eating 6 chicken and broccoli meals a day. That's not it.
Right.
But it's improving what you're doing, and, being active and having a, healthy body composition, and, having the right vitamins and minerals in your diet. And like, society would be so much better as a whole, I think, if we continue to shift that focus.
Totally. And again, we're not just fighting against information, we're fighting against a narrative that is controlling what we're thinking. And then this is creating a lot of problems. So it's really stepping outside of a narrative that is false.
Yes. So I appreciate the work that you're doing. We're going to continue to talk about these things because, it needs to be said. So any final words, anything you want to talk about that people can find you, or your website or anything like that?
You guys can find me. I am taking patients. We do have them go through an interview process. You can go to my website, drgabriellelyon.com, and you can fill out a patient application. I do a weekly newsletter, which I put highly curated papers. So I have a YouTube that I do with Dr. Donna Lehman, and we put out at least one YouTube video roughly a week. And like we talked about an older school twin study by Bouchard, which was great. And I put that in my newsletter. And you can find me at YouTube, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon. I also have a free protocol, which took a long time to write. It talks a lot about these concepts. So you can find that on my website. And then of course, Instagram, very active.
What is your handle? Just
Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, Lyon. Yeah.
Yes. So thank you so much again. I'm so happy we got to do this. And for anybody who wants more information, her newsletter is great. And of course, your Instagram and YouTube as well. So thank you guys once again. If you have any other questions, please let us know, and we will catch you next time.